The silence of the Gabonese jungle is usually a myth, but in that specific moment, as the small wooden boat drifted closer to the riverbank, the silence was heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. Sarah gripped the side of the boat so hard her knuckles turned white. Beside her, the local guide, usually a man of smiles and loud stories, was visibly trembling. His hand hovered instinctively over the tranquilizer rifle resting on his lap. He wasn't looking at the scenery. He was staring into the dense wall of green ahead, searching for a shadow that could kill a man in seconds. "Sarah, please," the guide whispered, his voice barely audible over the lapping water. "If he charges, you do not move. You do not run. But I am telling you, this is a mistake. He is not the baby you held. He is a king now, and kings do not like intruders." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. She knew the statistics. She knew that a silverback gorilla possesses the strength of 20 adult men. She knew that in the wild, territory is everything. But she also knew what she had felt 5 years ago, a heartbeat against her chest that was so fragile she was afraid to breathe. Suddenly, the bushes exploded. A guttural roar shook the very air around them, vibrating through the hull of the boat. Birds scattered into the sky in a panic. From the shadows emerged a creature of pure, terrifying power. He was massive. Over 400 pounds of muscle, black fur standing on end, teeth bared in a snarl that promised violence. He stood on 2 legs, beating his chest with a sound like thunder. It was him. It was Kumbuka. The guide raised the rifle. "He is charging. Get down." But Sarah didn't get down. Against every survival instinct in her body, she stood up. The massive beast dropped to all fours and sprinted toward the water, kicking up mud, closing the distance with terrifying speed. He wasn't stopping. This was it. The moment of truth that would either end in a miracle or a tragedy. To understand why Sarah refused to hide in the bottom of that boat, defying the terrified orders of an armed guide, you have to go back 5 years. You have to travel back to a night that smelled of heavy rain and iron, deep within a poaching zone on the outskirts of the national park. Sarah wasn't a veteran primatologist or a wildlife expert back then. She was a volunteer nurse, there to help local communities. But fate has a funny way of changing job descriptions. Rangers had brought in a crate seized from a truck bound for the black market. Inside wasn't contraband or ivory, but a shivering, dehydrating ball of fur no bigger than a human infant. His mother had been killed, and he was fading fast. The local vet was hours away, stuck behind a mudslide. "He won't last the night," the ranger had said, his voice heavy with resignation. "He has given up." Sarah hadn't accepted that. For the next 7 days she didn't sleep. She became his entire world. That single week was a blur of warmed goat's milk, hushed lullabies, and the sensation of tiny, leather-like fingers gripping her index finger with desperate strength. She named him Kumbuka, Swahili for remember, a prayer that he would recall he was loved, even after the trauma. For 7 days she was his mother. She carried him in a sling against her chest so he could hear her heartbeat. She breathed for him when he was too weak to do it himself. And then, just as his eyes began to brighten and his grip tightened, the specialists arrived. They told her that for him to survive in the wild, human contact had to end immediately. He needed to be with his own kind. She handed him over in tears, watching as the truck drove away. She had only known him for 1 week, just 168 hours. In the grand scheme of a gorilla's life, she was a blink of an eye. Everyone told her that he would forget her. They said the wild would wash away the memory of the nurse who held him while he died. They told her that coming back was suicide. But as she stood on that boat, watching the monster on the shore charge, she was betting her life on the impossible hope that love doesn't watch the clock. That first night in the makeshift clinic 5 years ago was the longest of Sarah's life. The air inside the small concrete room was thick with humidity, smelling faintly of antiseptic, and the metallic tang of the jungle mud clinging to the ranger's boots. Kumbuka lay on a sterile metal table, a tiny broken thing. He was impossibly small. His black fur was matted with dirt, and his eyes, oversized for his shrunken face, were glazed over with a dull acceptance of death. He didn't cry. He didn't even have the energy to shiver anymore. The ranger's words, "He has given up," echoed in the cramped space. Sarah, armed only with stubbornness and a syringe of electrolyte solution, refused to accept that verdict. The local vet had mentioned via static-filled radio that the infant's temperature was critically low. Medical equipment was scarce, so Sarah did the only thing that made instinctive sense: skin-to-skin contact. She sat in a rickety chair, unbuttoned her linen shirt, and placed the cold, limp creature directly against her chest, right over her heart. She covered them both with a thick wool blanket. He smelled intensely of wet earth, fear, and sickness. For hours, she just sat there humming a tuneless melody, willing her own body heat to seep into his. Around 3 a.m. the shift happened. Sarah had been dozing, exhausted, her chin resting on her chest. Suddenly, she felt a twitch against her ribs. Then another. A tiny leathery hand, impossibly intricate and human-like, reached up blindly. It grasped at the fabric of her shirt before finding the bare skin of her collarbone. His fingers, cold and weak, curled around her pinky finger. He squeezed. It was a desperate, feeble grip, but it was undeniable proof of life. He let out a soft, whimpering grunt, a sound that Sarah felt reverberate through her own bones more than she heard it. She squeezed back, tears cutting clean tracks through the sweat and dust on her face. That week became a sacred, sleepless bubble, separate from the rest of the busy outpost. Sarah became a nocturnal creature, tuned entirely to his needs. She learned the specific rhythm of his breathing. She knew the exact whimper that meant hunger versus the deeper grunt that meant fear. He refused the bottle unless he was looking directly into her face. When he slept, fitfully, he needed her hand resting on his small back to stay settled. Then came the separation. When the primatologists arrived from the rehabilitation center, the atmosphere changed from warmth to clinical detachment. They were kind but firm, explaining the harsh reality of conservation. "You've saved his life physically," the lead veterinarian had told her gently, taking the now alert baby from her arms. "But now you have to save his future. If he imprints on you further, if he thinks humans are mothers, a poacher will just walk right up to him in 5 years and shoot him. He must fear us to survive us." Sarah knew the logic. It was sound. It was necessary. But logic didn't stop the feeling that she was betraying him. Handing him over to the sanctuary staff felt like a physical amputation. The last thing she saw as the jeep pulled away was Kumbuka looking over the shoulder of his new handler. His large dark eyes locked onto hers, confused and terrified, letting out a high-pitched scream of abandonment that had echoed in her nightmares for 5 years. 5 years is a lifetime. In the city, 5 years is just a change in fashion, a new phone model, a few grey hairs. But in the jungle, 5 years is the difference between a helpless victim and a king. Sarah sat in the boat, the humid air sticking her shirt to her back, her heart hammering a rhythm against her ribs that matched the frantic beat of the boat's engine. She had spent every day of those 5 years wondering, did he survive the rehabilitation? Did he find a troop? Was he lonely? The sanctuary updates had stopped 2 years ago when he was fully released into the protected zone. He was effectively a ghost. "We are close to the sector where the trackers saw him last week," David, the guide, said, cutting the engine to a low hum. "But Sarah, look at me. You need to prepare yourself. He is a wild animal. The Kumbuka you knew is gone. Biology takes over." Sarah nodded, but she didn't believe him. She couldn't. The boat drifted silently toward a muddy bank lined with towering mangroves. The air was thick with the screech of cicadas. Then the silence broke. The explosion of noise, the crashing of branches, the guttural roar happened in an instant. As described in the hook, the massive shape burst from the tree line. This wasn't the shivering ball of fur she had nursed. This was a titan. He was magnificent and terrifying, a mountain of black muscle moving with lethal grace. "He is charging! Get down!" David screamed, raising the rifle. Sarah stood up. It was the most foolish, dangerous thing she had ever done. The massive gorilla was closing the distance, teeth bared, tearing up the mud. 10 meters. 5 meters. The smell of him hit her, musk and wild power. David was shouting, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No, don't shoot!" Sarah screamed, throwing her hand out not at the gorilla but toward the gun. At the sound of her voice, the world seemed to freeze. The 400-pound silverback skidded to a halt just 3 feet from the boat. The water splashed up around his massive knuckles. He was close enough that Sarah could see the amber flecks in his dark eyes. He was breathing heavily, his nostrils flaring, a low rumble emanating from his chest that vibrated the floorboards of the boat. He didn't attack. He didn't retreat. He just stared. Sarah lowered her hand slowly. She was trembling so violently she thought her knees would buckle. She took a breath, trying to steady her voice, trying to find the tone she hadn't used in half a decade. "Kumbuka," she whispered. "It's me." The giant beast tilted his head. It was a gesture so eerily human, so familiar, that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. The aggression in his posture began to melt away, replaced by an intense, scrutinizing curiosity. He leaned forward, sniffing the air, taking in her scent over the smell of the river fuel. The terrifying monster was gone. The confused child was looking back at her. I'm reading the comments from the last video, and honestly, you guys are the most supportive community on the internet. Before we see what Kumbuka does next, I want to invite you to join us properly. Subscribing here isn't just clicking a button, it's pulling up a chair to our campfire. Let me know in the comments, what's the longest you've gone without seeing someone you love? I want to read your stories. David, the guide, was hyperventilating. His finger was still hovering over the trigger of the tranquilizer gun, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Sarah," he hissed, his voice trembling, "get back in the boat, now. You are too close." But Sarah couldn't move backward. She could only move forward. Kumbuka remained on all fours in the shallow water, the river lapping against his massive forearms. The aggressive posture, the rigid stance, the bristling hair had vanished. In its place was an intensity that felt almost scientific. He was studying her. He let out a low double grunt, a sound primatologists call a belch vocalization, a signal of contentment and non-aggression. Sarah knew that sound. It was deeper now, resonating like a cello string, but the cadence was the same as the baby who used to sleep on her chest. Slowly, moving as if she were walking through underwater currents, Sarah stepped over the gunwale of the boat. Her boots sank into the river mud. David let out a strangled noise of protest, but he didn't shoot. He seemed paralyzed by the sheer insanity of what he was witnessing. Sarah waded through the knee-deep water until she was less than an arm's length away from the apex predator. Up close, his size was overwhelming. His head was the size of a boulder, and his arms were thick with muscle that could snap a crocodile's spine. If he decided to swing, it would be over before she even felt the impact. "Hi, baby," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "You got so big." Kumbuka leaned forward. He didn't roar. He didn't bite. He extended his face toward hers, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled deeply. He was smelling the soap she used, the sweat of her fear, the pheromones of the woman who had once been his entire universe. Then, he did something that made David lower the rifle completely. Kumbuka raised a massive black hand. His fingers were thick, tipped with dark nails, stained with the juice of jungle fruits. He reached out with agonizing slowness. Sarah closed her eyes, trusting him completely. She felt his knuckles graze her cheek, a touch lighter than a butterfly. He made a soft rumbling sound in his throat, a purr of recognition. He began to groom her. His massive fingers, capable of crushing bones, deftly picked a stray leaf from her shoulder. He tugged gently at a lock of her hair, inspecting it closely. Sarah slowly raised her hand. She didn't try to pet his head like a dog. Instead, she extended her pinky finger. It was the old signal, the anchor in the storm. Kumbuka paused. He looked at the finger, then up at her eyes. The amber flecks in his iris seemed to catch the sunlight. Slowly, deliberately, the 400-pound silverback curled his massive index finger around her small, trembling pinky. The fit was awkward now. His hand dwarfed hers, but the pressure was familiar. He squeezed. Just a little. It was the handshake of two old souls meeting across a divide of time and biology. In that silence, broken only by the river and the birds, the boundaries between human and animal dissolved. There was only memory. He hadn't forgotten. The king of the jungle was still, in some hidden corner of his heart, the little boy who didn't want to be alone in the dark. The moment lasted perhaps 20 minutes, but for Sarah it existed outside of time. Eventually the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the river. David cleared his throat, a sound of apology and necessity. "Sarah," he whispered, "we must go. The troop. If the others come, they might not be as understanding as him." Sarah knew he was right. This was a miracle, and you don't push a miracle too far. She slowly withdrew her finger. Kumbuka didn't try to stop her. He didn't grab her or growl. He simply watched her hand retreat, his dark eyes deep and unreadable. He understood the language of silence better than any human. Backing away toward the boat felt like tearing a suture. Every step through the mud was heavy. When she climbed back over the gunwale, her legs finally gave out, and she collapsed onto the wooden bench, physically drained by the adrenaline and the emotion. David started the engine. The noise shattered the quiet sanctuary they had created, but Kumbuka didn't flinch. He turned, his massive silver back catching the light, and climbed effortlessly up the muddy bank to the high ground. As the boat pulled away, widening the gap between the world of men and the world of the wild, Kumbuka stopped. He turned around one last time. He stood on his hind legs, tall and proud against the tree line, watching the small boat disappear down the river. He didn't roar. He just stood witness. The heartbreaking part wasn't that she had to leave him. The heartbreak came from the beautiful, devastating realization that he didn't need her anymore. He was a king now. He was free. And yet, amidst the brutality of the law of the jungle, he had chosen to be gentle. He had chosen to remember. Sarah wiped the tears from her face, looking back until the black shape was swallowed by the green wall of the jungle. She had saved him once, but today, with that single touch, he had saved her right back.